Right. Okay, well this is the part where we tell you what the show's about, and if you rightly so have any kind of like moral barometer, you can leave. So the show is about serial killers. Each episode we look at a serial killer and we talk about them in depth and talk about their crimes in a humorous but hopefully not distasteful way, and we're doing it live in Edinburgh. It's been fucking great fun. All the little weirdos are finding us. Thank you very much. Yeah, fucking oddballs, a lot of you. This is really bad, isn't it? So I might just pull it out. Yeah, we basically will talk about a serial killer and get properly stuck into them. So if it's not for you, that's totally fine. This one is definitely not for tourists.
You are fine with nudity.
Yeah, we've got sort of a big finish. So this episode is, we're keeping it local. We've come from Manchester and it's the Yorkshire Ripper, so it's quite a contemporary case. I believe we've got, and he's one of the serial killers that a lot of people have a story for, don't they?
Yeah.
Everyone claims to know him. Don't they? It's like everyone says they're secretly related to royalty. Everyone says that they knew the Yorkshire Ripper at one point.
Especially in the north, we've all got a Ripper story.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. I totally get it if it's not your cup of tea. Leave now. No one will judge you. Won't slag you off when you're leaving or anything like that. I get that it's not for everyone. Okay. So here's your amnesty. Right, fucking locked in now, fuckers. So it goes. So we're really lucky. Ed's our guest. So why did you choose the Yorkshire Ripper?
Can I just say, when you were saying we talk about a serial killer in depth, I was just sat in the middle. There were definitely people in here going, "Is it him?"
What a reveal!
Well, I'm a big fan of your podcast. First of all,
Oh, that's
I've
nice.
listened to all of them. And a lot of them are like serial killers from other countries.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of talking about someone we can we can connect with the terror, because it was like local, like the amount of terror that must have been surrounding that when that was all happening.
Yeah.
I find that a lot more of a gripping sort of worrying topic to discuss, rather than sexy Americans.
Yeah, it's true. It's like the UKIP, keeping it local.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the day that we say to our guest, so why did you choose like Peter Sutcliffe? And I'm waiting for the day someone goes, well, sometimes they just choose you. I'm waiting for that one. It will happen.
But he's one of Rachel's, going to use a bad word now, bad F word, favourites. Yeah, that's right, we've all got a top three. And he's one that you like, but you're very patriotic anyway. You like
I
the
like
British
the British serial killer.
Yeah, it's got to be like a Mike Leigh film for her to get involved in it. But I like the American glamour.
There's definitely an earthier, grittier quality to it.
Yeah. But because it is a very contemporary case. Does anyone remember it coming out in the press and all the? Yeah. So some people like you remember it happening, don't you?
I wasn't bloody born, mate.
No, not it happening. I know that's the 70s.
I wasn't there.
Here we go.
Yeah, well, my mum actually remembers a lot about it, and she likes to tell. Well, I once got in a truck, and they knew he was a truck driver. Nice one, Mum.
That's quite the story.
That is quite the story.
Yeah, don't hold court if you've not got a story. Right, okay, so he was born June 2nd, 1946 in Bingley, to sort of Catholic, working class Irish family.
Yeah, which, to be honest with you, most serial killers have a really sort of weird background. And I was reading this, I'm like, born in the north, working class Catholic family. Nothing weird about that. So far I'm relating to it.
That's quite a weird background for me.
Yeah.
That's what I think the whole Yorkshire Ripper thing says a lot about the community in the north of England, because ripples of terror went through the community. It wouldn't happen in London. No one would give a shit.
Yeah. There's a lot of cases of neighbours helping or discovering. No one knows their fucking neighbour in London.
Absolutely not. Lock the door.
So he had quite it sounds like a lot of them have really traumatic childhood, so it's sort of more understandable. But his dad was a bit of a lad, like aggressive, loved sport, and Peter was the firstborn son, so he was really excited, couldn't wait for him to get old enough to get pissed and go out and go to the sports with him. But Peter was a proper mummy's boy.
Yeah, he was very, very, very clingy. He used to follow his mother around the house. Very quiet child. He wouldn't play with the other kids at school either. He was picked on.
Yeah. His dad used to come in at lunchtimes and tell him to go and play with the other kids. Like that was going to help things, because unsurprisingly he was bullied because his fucking dad was coming in every lunchtime.
Yeah.
Like, things like that are not helping themselves.
So being Peter with the weird dad wasn't helping from the start.
And then he was very attached to his mother. He got to secondary school, it got even worse. At one point he went missing for 2 weeks from school, and what he would do is he'd pretend he was going to school, then go in through the back door and then go up to the loft and just read comics for 2 weeks in a torch, which is pretty much how it works for home educated kids, isn't it?
I'm associating with him more and more. And what's weird about it, I don't know if anyone else is doing this, when I imagine him as a child, he's still got a beard.
There's Wolfkins in
Russia. With his comics.
So it wasn't particularly...
It was unremarkable.
Yeah,
at
pretty
school.
much.
Pretty under the radar, nothing
Yeah.
much. He left school at 15. He had a few sort of normal jobs, but one of the jobs that he did have was as a grave digger. And when you read one of the books about him, the things that he did as a grave digger, he was quite the joker. There were stories of him sort of, because he used to dig up the graves that were old ones, and then they'd move them so they could sell them on, and someone else could be buried in them. But they'd open these coffins, and they'd try and move them, and sort of bones would fall out. And one afternoon he decided to chase a few girls from the grammar school up the road with a skull that he'd found from one of the coffins. On another occasion, he was in the pub chatting to his friends, and one of his friends was saying he was going to get married. And he put his hand in his pocket and went, "Oh, do you need an engagement ring? Why don't you have one of these?" And he had a handful of rings that he'd clearly taken off bodies from the coffins that he'd been digging up. And there's also a funny story when he met his wife. He was very romantically took her to the graveyard for a walk round. So they went round the graveyard and had a bit of a stroll, and he's trying to frighten her. And he's running along the wall, and he jumped over a wall, which he didn't realise was a 15-foot drop. So he broke his ankle.
He's like the lad Bible of the grave diggers. Look at his skull.
I'm just thinking, if someone's doing that and they're getting a skull and they're chasing someone down the street, just arrest him there. Just to be safe. Yeah, just sit in the butt.
So he met his wife, Sonia. He met her when he was 20. Introduced him to a family. She was Ukrainian, wasn't she, of descent? And introduced him to the family. Her dad absolutely loved him. Thought he was really lovely. The family thought he was great. He was really well accepted because his dad apparently wasn't sure until he found out that he was good with money.
Very frugal.
Which is quite, I think it's a Yorkshire trait, isn't it? And the dad's like, "You're all right by me."
It sounds more and more like Alan Partridge. He's got a wife called Sonia from the Ukraine.
One of the jobs that he did do as well, Sonia was training to be a school teacher, and Sonia was also a schizophrenic who had several nervous breakdowns as well. So great meeting there, two wonderful people. Poor old Sonia, she didn't know what was going to happen there, did she? So he was working at a place called Clark's Brothers. He got made redundant from one job, mainly for stealing tyres. And he took this other job on, which was he wanted to get an HGV licence, so he used his redundancy for that. And in the audience today, a little like surprise,
Oh, really?
we have Kate Fox here, the poet and comedian, and your auntie.
Yes.
She owned Clark's.
Yeah, she was married to Willie Clark, and I, at the time of the Yorkshire Ripper stuff, because I wasn't alive then, but I didn't know her. I met her later when I met my real dad. And one of the first things I found out about my new family was that my auntie had employed the Yorkshire Ripper.
To be honest, that would be my opening gambit if I had a thing like that. I'd drop that straight away and deal with that fucker.
But they found him to be a really, really good employee. He was like one of their best employees. And apparently they basically bought him a really big, shiny new truck. So not for him to take home, obviously, but it was his because he was one of the most clean and hygienic of their truck drivers.
They often are, aren't they?
All that, scrubbing up and that. And it was Auntie Mary who went to Shipley Bank and got the £5 note that eventually it was her who physically took that.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Which we will get to very soon.
This is so exciting. You're my Michael Jackson. This is so exciting.
It's become like surprise. But with more deaths. So we'll come back to you in a second. So he's married to Sonia. We've got this far, haven't we? He's married to Sonia. And it was said as well because Peter, a few people have said about him. One of the things people commented on, because of his past job as a grave digger, he had developed an unhealthy, macabre sense of humour. And we don't think there's anything
Yeah.
wrong with that.
What's
So
wrong with that?
we're quite comfortable with that bit of his character.
He was quite a respectable man, and a lot of his employees said that he was very conscientious, very meticulous, very very clean, which is an odd word to use, isn't it? But he had a habit. He liked to go out and go and get pissed, and one of his other habits was he liked to cruise the red light district. So he made friends with a guy called Robin Holland, and he'd brag about banging prostitutes to him. But he would get really moral at the same time. When he was around his wife, he'd say, "I can't stand adulterous men." And Robin got sick of his shit, so he binned him off. And he made friends with this guy who becomes very important called Trevor Birdsall.
Mm-hmm.
So they used to go out together and go around the red light district together. And Peter was the one who shopped him, right? He sent an anonymous letter at one point.
Trevor.
Yeah, this is it, Trevor, sorry. In 1969, he sent this, saying, "I think this guy's the Yorkshire Ripper," but kept going out drinking with him till 1981. Good for a laugh though, isn't he? And he's always going on in a taxi.
It was more or less Trevor's wife that thought Peter was weird as well, because when they were getting together, her and Trevor, she was like, "There's something not right about him." And she would never set her friends up with him because she could just sense there was something very peculiar about him. Trevor as well commented in several interviews that Peter sometimes would sit there in the pub and it was like he was just totally zoned out. But one afternoon, he was sitting holding a pint and he held it that much, he gripped it, the glass smashed.
Again, call the police immediately.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so many warning points, isn't there?
But my girlfriend says that about my mates. Like, it's not quite right with it.
So the first murder began in 1975. It was, or was it a murder, or did she get away?
The first attack.
First attack.
They think that Peter at some point he alleged that he was shortchanged by a prostitute. And this,
Which is the most Yorkshire
Yeah.
reason 13 women I've ever heard in my life.
Oh, this is for a quid. He went out with Trevor. Trevor was driving his car and he's like, "Oh, I'll be back in a minute." And he buggers off.
Oh no, it's not this one, there's the one before.
Oh,
This woman's walking home that he sees in the pub, right? She's had a big bust up with a fella.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
she had a big fight with a fella, so she's like, "Fuck it, I'm going out with the girls." So she went out, she gets hammered, she walks home to his place, banging on the door, he's out with the guys. So she sounds fucking brilliant. Her name was Anna, and then a really exciting...
Anna Gulska.
There we go. She smashed his window in with a shoe. Because she's not taking any more of his shit. And Peter Sutcliffe has been hiding in the shadows, and he jumps out, and his weapon of choice was a hammer, and he hit her with a hammer from behind. She starts screaming. He used to carry a knife or a screwdriver. He slashed her stomach. A neighbour looked out the window and went, "What's going on here?" And he went, "No, nothing, it's all right." And he went, "Okay, good night." Just fucking popped back in again. And he went to sexually assault her. He lifted her skirt up and pulled her pants down, but because he got disturbed, he put it all back as if she had just been attacked. So one of the reasons why it was never pinned on him for a very long time is it didn't look like it was sexually motivated like all the other crimes, so they just thought it was a weird, unprovoked attack, and it never got explained, and it also meant that the police didn't sort of catch on that there was this fucking horrible guy operating in the area for a while. So that was his first attack, but not his first murder.
No, the poor woman, I mean, she had such a miserable life afterwards, didn't she, as well?
Yeah.
Because it totally ruined her life, and she became more or less a recluse after that.
Yeah, she just barricaded herself in her house and lived there with 5 cats, which, to be honest, sounds my fucking ideal life.
Well, to be honest, I think it might be my future. Just worry me. So after that, this was the one where I went out with Trevor, the second one, wasn't it?
Yeah, olive smelt.
Yeah, he was out with Trevor. Trevor's sitting in the car, like the harmless friend that he is, and he's like, he runs off for a bit, Peter, he comes back, and he says to him, "Oh, I've just hit that woman with a brick in a sock."
Yeah, but the sock broke, so I didn't do it properly.
Yeah, and Trevor's like, "Oh, right, okay." So the woman that he attacked took down the number plate, told the police, they got hold of them both, and he said to Peter Sutcliffe, "You're very lucky because the woman who has reported this doesn't want anything else to do with it." So that would have been on record, and that should have been something that in the future they should have really picked up on.
Did he take his own sock off?
That's what I want to know, isn't it? Was it his cheap sock?
Or did he take a brick and a sock with him? Because
that's true.
Because it seems to suggest when I've read stuff about it that he did it out of sudden anger and just decided to do it.
But it's definitely...
But there's all that of just like rolling your sock down, putting it in. And by the time I got here, I'd be like, I probably shouldn't do this.
In August 1975, 5.
Oh, this was Olive, wasn't it?
This was Olive Smelt, yeah.
Olive Smelt, brilliant name.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Another Radio 4 afternoon playing.
She was taking a shortcut on her way home one night, and she heard a man behind her who was saying something about the weather again.
He said, again, this is a like British way of getting someone's attention to then bludgeon them with a hammer is, weather's letting us down, isn't it? Just have a little moan, get that in there before you kill her.
He attacked her and he slashed her with the implement that he had. A car came and he was disturbed, and this attack, horrible attack, lasted for 10 minutes. And I'll be honest, I've heard worse people do worse things in 10 minutes on the fringe than that attack. She was terrible. Again, the poor woman had emotional scars. She had a terrible, miserable life afterwards.
Yeah, memory loss, depression.
Yeah.
And what was really sad for her is because there was, again, this weird unprovoked attack. Her husband was home looking after the kids while she was out on the lash. And because, as they do, the police questioned the husband, she forever suspected that her husband might have done it. So it just completely disintegrated their marriage, and this poor guy had just been at home babysitting their kids for the night. So again, because it was different to the first attack, and there's no sort of sexual thing there, they weren't linked together.
Was he meaning to kill these women and fumbling it, or like was he warming up? Was he warming up to?
I think he was. I think he, with a lot of them, he didn't mean to kill them. He just went into a frenzy because there's a couple where he's let them get away, but then afterwards he's gone back because he realises they're witnesses. But I think it's more of a frenzy thing because some of them he hits like 3 or 4 times with a hammer in the head, which is horrendous, but they still live. But I think it's just part of his. Part of his
I think it was. I think he went out with the intention to do the worst he could possibly do, but he didn't have the confidence to carry on with it, and he was like. It's like the first time you do anything, isn't it? It's like stand-up as well. The first time you do it. Made loads of mistakes.
You don't kill the first time.
So 27th of August then is another attack. It was a 14-year-old girl called Tracy Brown, and she was walking up a country lane, and he attacked her, and he hit her 5 times with the hammer. He wasn't actually convicted of this, but he admitted it in 1992. And then after all these, we get to the first murder, which was in 1976.
So this is Wilma McCann. She was a 28-year-old girl, mother of 4. Now she'd gone out on the piss and she'd left a 9-year-old to look after the kids. And then she's
different time.
Judging. What's this? Daily Mail? Come on. Shit, we didn't do our intro. We'll do it.
We'll do it at
the end. So she flagged. They always refer to her as fiery. She sounds like a fucking mental case. She was walking home pissed. She flagged a lorry down for a lift. He opened the door and apparently she just gave him loads of shit, called him a fuckwit, so he just drove off. And then later on she was seen getting into someone else, I think it was a West Indian man's car. That was the last time she was seen alive at 1:30, and this is so sad. In the meantime, Peter Sutcliffe found her, and her kids were found in the bus stop at 5 a.m. in their pyjamas waiting for her to come home, because Mummy had to come home, which is incredibly...
And she was just she could see a house from where...
She was 100 yards from the house when he got her.
He hit twice with a hammer, attacked her with a screwdriver. There was evidence from him, they found semen on her, and he also stamped on her thigh and left a boot impression. After this attack, there was 150 police officers working on this case. And tragically, one of her daughters actually committed suicide in 2007 because of the years of misery she'd gone through because of her mother's murder. So this is the one where it was a huge murder, but they weren't connecting it to anything else, any other attack.
These were just, as far as they're concerned, just 3 separate horrible incidents that had happened. And then there's sort of a red herring was thrown in as well, because in 1975, on the 20th of November, you might have heard of this, so Joan Harrison, in very similar circumstances, gets found in a garage in Preston, and she's been sexually assaulted, and she's been hit with a hammer, and she's been strangled. And they went, oh, there's a link, and linked these murders together. And in fact, I don't know if you heard, there's a comedian called Filla, right, who does a kids show.
It wasn't him.
No. Being quite the night of reveals, isn't it? But no, he's from Preston originally, and his parents, this woman was found in a garage, and his parents were walking down when they were younger, and there was a garage a bit open, and they'd been waiting for one from the council, and I'm like, look, no one's in that one, the garage is open. He's like, I'm just going to go and have a look. And she was like, will you just leave it, please? You don't need to go through people's garages. And he's like, I just want to see if they've got anything in there, and then I can call the council. And she was like, no, just come on. And he left, and then hours later there was a body found in there. Isn't that mad?
Yeah.
Absolutely bonkers. But they pinned it. They went, oh right, we've got a pattern now. So, but there were some discrepancies with Joan Harrison's death that meant that much further along the line, many victims along the line, they kept getting distracted by going, oh, but with Joan Harrison this happened, and in the letters, the guy who wrote false letters kept saying he'd killed Joan Harrison, so they were putting pieces together that weren't matching and forcing them to fit, which meant that he was, in the meantime, Peter Sutcliffe was just sort of getting on with it. Getting on with it.
Getting on with it.
Right phrase.
Then the 20th of January 1976, Emily Jackson was the next victim. She was a woman who had been, she was married, she had children. She'd become a prostitute because they had absolutely no money whatsoever. Her husband used to drove the van. He'd wait for her, take her to Leeds, and he'd wait for her in a bar. Very supportive.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? Nice to have a hobby.
Yeah. Nobody in the family knew about this apart from Emily and her husband, Sydney. And what happened? Peter Sutcliffe one night finds Emily while her husband's waiting. He attacks her, kills her. He uses a hammer, a Phillips screwdriver. Now, I was thinking, can you imagine that rebrand meeting that Phillips had?
What about Peter? We're not calling it Peter. But it's really sad because she used to take the van to go and sort of make a bit of money so they'd be able to pay the rent. It's incredibly tragic. Sydney would wait for her. He waited for her, thought, oh, she'll come back later, so he got a taxi home. And her body was found like 800 yards from where he'd been waiting for her.
And he's getting more brutal with his murder as well because he stamped on her as well. And he'd managed to get a print from his shoes. And he was actually wearing Dunlop Wellingtons. Again, Dunlop, that rebrand.
Which again is the most Yorkshire thing for a serial killer to wear, just a very sensible pair of Dunlop Wellingtons.
The saddest thing about this as well, her husband actually was like, well, where is she? He went home and she was found 800 yards from where her husband was waiting for her. And this is where the police eventually link the murders of Emily Jackson and Wilmot McCann. They start to think, well, this is the same person. Poor old Sydney, her husband, he was so upset and devastated by this, he had to send his kids away because he couldn't bear the thought of having to tell them that the mother had been murdered. And this is Peter Sutcliffe. This is the same year that Peter Sutcliffe gets sacked.
Someone else tell them.
Someone else did. Don't worry.
I think they said, oh, she's gone to a farm in Wales.
Well, I said this show's a bit like surprise, surprise. Okay. Come on out, we've got something to tell you. So this is 1976 as well. This is where Sutcliffe was sacked from the tyre factory for thieving as well. So
It was the same month that these letters started to appear because just like the original Jack the Ripper, people had started sending letters claiming it's fucking mad. Apparently the newspapers and the police were getting thousands of letters. I don't know who these people. There's probably some in this room, aren't there? It's such a the art of letter writing is very much dead anyway until there's a serial killer and everyone gets their fucking quills out. Because they were getting so many letters. One of these letters that ended up obviously being misleading but important to their case was just stuffed in a pile and sort of ignored. But that's when it started in that March of '76, the letter writing.
Yeah. And George Oldfield, who was in charge of the investigation, he became obsessed by the particular letters, the Wearside Jack letters. So it really sort of took the investigation in a different way that it should never have gone.
Yeah, definitely.
In 1976 as well, in May, Marcella Claxton wasn't murdered, but she was on her way home from a party. She was given a lift by Peter Sutcliffe. They offered her £5 for sex, and she was like...
Well, she was a prostitute, but it was a night off.
It was a night off,
yeah. And he said, I'll give you £5 for sex. And she's like, no, it's my night off. And then he,
What's that in today's money?
That's exactly what I was thinking, because it doesn't sound very much.
I think it's about 20 quid.
Really? No, it's got to be more than that. Does anyone know what it would convert as? If it's 1976. How much was a Mars bar then? Does anyone know?
How much was full sex then?
That's what Mars bar is.
I'm from the south today.
It sounded like we were asking a granddad at Christmas, like, tell us about Mars bars in your old days, granddad.
But he went to... Are you trying to work it out now? There's so loads like that. He went to grab her and he accidentally dropped his hammer. And she said, what was that? And he said, oh, it was my wallet. Which it would have been that fucking heavy because he's that tight. So she just ignored it. And then she went for a wee round the back of the tree. And then he hit her on the head with a hammer twice then. And apparently she remembers seeing his face. And she remembered he had dark hair and a crinkly beard. She remembers that because she gave a very good description to the police. And she said that as soon as he saw the blood from her wound, that's what he started masturbating with, so it was the idea, he's totally fucked up.
Let me make this clear, he's not a nice guy.
I was on the fence.
This is your life, we're not trying to convince you. he cleaned himself up with some tissues and he threw them on her, which obviously had DNA, which is useful, but he also threw a £5 note on her, which is the behaviour of a cunt, innit?
Yeah. She then hid in a phone box for a while, and
God,
while she was hiding, he was maybe changed his mind. He thought, I've actually got a killer, because he was prowling the area in his car.
Driving around trying to find her.
So she, like I said, she went through a lot of misery herself.
52 stitches
yeah.
that had spooned me.
By this point, all the prostitutes are talking about this. They're starting to think, this is really bad. What's happening? Start working in groups. They hadn't linked other attacks on the prostitutes, this particular attack, to any of the murders at this point either.
And I think the prostitutes were quite smart. So what they would do is they'd hang around in gangs to keep safe. They'd have systems in place. They would record every registration number of the car that they got into. So if a girl didn't come back, they'd have evidence. But at the time, they didn't have a great relationship with the police, and the general community didn't have a brilliant relationship with the police. But the prostitutes sort of were taking it upon themselves to look after each other, which I think is great, isn't it?
It's very nice, yeah. In 1977, 5th of Feb, Irene Richardson was murdered, which is now becoming a typical Ripper killing.
Yeah. Hammers, stabs. So they're getting more and more violent. So there's more hammer strikes and there's more stabbing. So he's upping it, which quite often happens with them. That it's a bit like when you get pissed for the first time when you just have a little glass of wine. Well, it's like that with serial killers. So they need to. By the end of it, they're on Tennant's Lager, basically.
They found tyre tracks at the scene, which resulted in a list of potential suspect vehicles. Notice then they didn't have nothing was computerised. So 100,000 cars had to be checked by hand, and and then in this time he was off at it again 2 months later, and this is one of the ones where one of the women who was being careful, a prostitute, who was Patricia Atkinson, who thought, right, it's not safe out on the streets, I'm going to work from home.
That's the dream though, isn't it? Working from home. That's what I'm doing. Now you can do it in your pyjamas.
She was working from the flat because she was scared of bumping into the Ripper. He went back to a flat with her, murdered her. He left a Wellington print again on the bedclothes. He attacked her 4 times with a hammer and with a chisel as well.
Why weren't they avoiding men in Wellingtons?
It's Yorkshire, you can't fucking do it. It's very rainy county.
Yeah, all right. Turning up with his whippet.
Well, dogs do make an appearance.
Yeah, there are a couple of dog appearances. Look for you to look forward to.
The next murder is really crucial because what happened is Jane MacDonald, not that one.
She has murdered a few songs in it.
There's different crimes to answer for. She was a 16-year-old. She missed the bus. She was walking home, and she was walking home. One of her lad friends walked home to her house because his sister was going to drive them home. His sister wasn't in, so she called a taxi. Taxi didn't answer, and all this time, Peter Sutcliffe had been following her and watching her. So just a 16-year-old who was really excited because she just got a new job and went out to celebrate. He followed her home and did what he did, hit her with a hammer and stabbed her. And 2 kids found her in the morning in a playground. And it's really sad. Was this the one with her brother with a shoe?
No, that was later on. This one, her father never got over this. His health deteriorated. He got chronic asthma and he died, I think it was 2 years after the girl's murder. But this was the murder that made the public outraged because at first it was like, oh well, it's prostitutes that are being killed.
Yeah, they were basically like, oh, it's an occupational hazard, isn't it?
Yeah, the attitude was appalling. And when this young girl was killed, people were like, well, now one of the headlines was actually an innocent girl slaughtered. It was very much people, and there was actually an interview where a woman in the street saying, well, now a normal girl's being killed, I want them to do something about it. So people's attitudes were actually quite appalling at the time, but in a way, at least people were thinking, right, the police went, right, okay, we've got to work with the media now, we've got to make this a big story, which this is the one that really did make it in the public eye.
So the public were like, oh shit, well if it's happening to her, it can happen to anyone. So they basically they were swamped from information from the public, because before that, people didn't want to admit to knowing prostitutes or knowing anyone that had been murdered. But when it was an innocent girl, they all decided to step up. So there was 4,000 statements that were taken, 30,000 interviews carried out. They visited 679 homes. So that suddenly, it became a big thing. It was not a good murder. No. But it was a good thing to bring it to the public consciousness, because before that they would go, oh well, they're prostitutes, they're bringing it on themselves, which is fucking horrendous.
But Sutcliffe was never interviewed in amongst these ones because he just wasn't even on the radar.
He was a pillar of the community, so he was never questioned.
The next one was Maureen Long, who was attacked, but she wasn't murdered. She was waiting for a taxi. He offered her a lift. He attacked her, and he was interrupted by a barking dog.
It's the whippet.
It was last yeah.
And a security guard, a guy had seen a car speeding off, because when the dog barked, he got disrupted and went off the car. A security guard saw him and gave a description of the car and thought he got a bit of the registration number, but he did it incorrectly, which is a classic man to be like, no, I'm pretty sure it is a Mark II Ford Cortina.
Can't tell your wife's birthday, but I know about cars.
So they were looking for the wrong car as well for ages.
What about the barking dog interrupted him? Because he was like that frenzied, like a dog going, oh no, this dog's going to come here and ask me to stop.
I don't know, where was Lassie?
Yeah.
And she was found by two women. Strictly speaking, she should have died from her injuries because they were so horrendous. But she recovered. She was in the hospital for a very long time. She couldn't find work because she was very sick. She got caught stealing in the time after in her recovery. She was fined £75, and she said, you're going to have to wait because I'm waiting on my compensation, which she got £300 for.
I think if something that horrific has happened to you, that sort of crime, you should be allowed to do one lesser crime and get away with it.
I think if Winona Ryder can get away with stealing, and Richard Madeley's grabbing jumpers, we can let her off. But she would sell her story in the meantime to make money, which is really, really sad. They thought it was a taxi driver because it was identified as being a Ford Cortina. Lots of taxi drivers drove them at the time. So they interviewed loads of taxi drivers, and they had it almost pinned on one guy called Terry Hawkshaw, who lived with his mother, with his elderly mother, and he lived right in the middle of all the crime scenes, so they were like, it must be him, he's weird, he lives with his mum, right?
They kind of hounded him, really.
Yeah, they did, and the guy was, all the guy's excuses were just that he didn't have an alibi because he didn't really have any friends, so they kept him, it's so sad, they kept him under surveillance, and they took his locks of his hair, they would come back again, they'd take the carpets out of his car, they would take blood samples. He didn't do anything wrong other than being a bit of a mummy's boy. Which is really sad, isn't it?
He sounds like he did something. You should keep looking into it.
Keep Googling that name, I love Peter.
This 1977 as well was the year Peter Sutcliffe actually, after all this, he didn't get rid of his car, he just changed the colour because he was obviously keeping up with the news reports, and he's like, oh shit, hang on a minute, it might be on to me. So he changed the colour of his car. I just like to think that he was like, I'm not bloody getting a new one, it's a bloody good runner, this.
Miles to the gallon.
Yeah. Then we go to Jean Jordan, which is where the £5 note comes in.
Yeah.
I think this is my favourite fact about the Yorkshire Ripper, about who discovered Jean Jordan's body.
Oh yes.
Oh my god, it's...
Don't ruin it yet.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
Okay. But I'll let you tell it.
Yeah.
Okay. You can open the first present on Christmas Day. Jean Jordan, this one was in Manchester. Jean Jordan was 20 years old, a prostitute. Peter Sutcliffe picked her up. Now, she'd got in the car with him and he'd said, oh right, and she asked for the money first, so he gave her a £5 note, which she put in a little compartment in her handbag. He attacks her 13 times with a hammer, murders her, leaves the body there, but the body was left. I think it was about 7 days and nobody had found it. So he's thinking, oh, no one's found this body. And then he's thinking, oh shit, that £5 note was new and I got that in my wage packet. I'm going to have to go back and get her handbag, and nobody's found the body. So he heads back to Manchester from Leeds after having a dinner party with his wife and family.
His housewarming party.
Yeah, his housewarming party. All I'm imagining is him going, like, you know, try and get rid of people that are in your house. You're tired, Peter? No, I've just got to go back to this body. So he says, oh, I'll drop everyone off, you know, because I'm such a great guy. Drops them off and then heads back, just carries on to Manchester and goes back to the scene of the murder. He's trying to find the handbag, he can't find it. In a frenzy, he gets the body again and he tries to cut the body's head off.
Because he thought it would distract the police, because he's seen already that if there's a slightly different approach to a murder, the police don't link them. So he thought, if I do this, if I get rid of her head, which is psychotic, obviously, then they won't suspect that it's me. But he didn't have the implements with him, did he?
No, I didn't.
Just a welly.
So the body was eventually found by
Bruce Jones, who later went on to play Les Battersby in Coronation.
How amazing!
As if this couldn't be any more northern.
But apparently it did affect it because he's Bruce Jones is an alcoholic, and he attributes that he never got over, because she had been there for like a week. She'd started decomposing already, and she was horrifically. He got so furious when he couldn't find the handbag. He took it out on her body, which was so mad. And if you look properly, it was only 100 yards away. But men fucking won't look, will they? It's easier to ask a woman where it is.
He did say it did ruin his life, Bruce Jones. He made him an alcoholic, made him
Got sacked, didn't he?
He got sacked, and I was thinking.
Broke up with Janice.
He got sacked for being racist, Bruce Jones. So don't find a dead body; it'll make you racist.
Yeah, I have that. We had a really one of our relatives had a very long death, and then after that, I hated gay marriage. It's very common.
Yeah, it's strange what these things can do to you. Anna Holt, one of her friends, demanded to see the body because her husband went to identify the body.
This is the thing. Her husband, this poor woman that was found, Alan, didn't notice that she'd gone, because apparently she used to go off back home to Scotland all the time, so he didn't notice that she was missing. And then he saw the reports on the news that a woman was found with auburn hair, which she had, and he brought a picture to the police and said, "Is this her?" But he'd just gone to town on her. They couldn't recognise, and also no one looks at the passport picture anyway, do they? So they couldn't find it, and eventually, again, it was a woman who came along and went, "Let me see it." He said, "Yeah, that's her." But what they asked him to do, because they couldn't make a positive identification even after Anna, her friend, saying which is quite a good bit of policing in the 70s, especially because they're so fucking cack at everything else. Is they made him get a bottle of beer from home with her fingerprints on it, and then they linked it to the fingerprints there, but she couldn't be identified otherwise.
So they found the handbag on October the 15th, and this is the £5 note was in there. It was traced by the serial number. So your auntie, she would have given the Yorkshire Ripper his £5 note.
Yeah. Good job they didn't check that for fingerprints. Your auntie would have been fucked, wouldn't she?
So the police traced the serial number on the £5 note to two areas, Shipley and Bingley. So, which sounds like a great double act, doesn't it? Bingley, this is Bingley. 5,000 men who worked at Clark's and another place were interviewed. 5,000, but they couldn't find anything. Peter Sutcliffe himself was interviewed as part of this because he worked for Clark's, and there was nothing.
They said they didn't suspect him, and also when they verified his alibi with Sonia, she was like, "Oh yeah, no, he was at home at the time." So you don't think that she was involved, do you?
I think Sonia Sutcliffe had a lot going on.
Oh yeah,
mentally.
She doesn't know which voice was at home that night, does she?
And she used to do a lot of pottery, so you get really engrossed in stuff like that. So I mean, if I was married and if I was doing something creative and my boyfriend came back covered in blood really late one night, I probably wouldn't even notice myself. So,
That's a very exciting version of Ghost. And then he killed another prostitute called Marilyn Moore.
She survived.
Oh, she survived.
Yeah, she gave an excellent description of him, and they had matching tyre tracks again.
Another dog.
Another dog interrupted.
Yeah, dogs. It really
it's
is
the same
destroyed by a
It's a
dog.
proper pussy.
Yeah. Some people are cat people, and that's fine.
So this in 1978 they decided they weren't getting anywhere with the £5 note inquiry, so they knocked that on the head. January 1978, they actually thought he'd stopped at that point.
Yeah, because they didn't link loads of the murders to him, so they thought, as far as they're concerned, he'd stopped for a few years because they hadn't put all this information together.
This is some of the most bumbling police work.
Oh, I swear every single one that we talk about, the police are like the fucking Keystone Cops going around. It's insane. They're so bad.
But it was all, obviously there's no computers, so they literally just had to write stuff on paper and then...
And hope that didn't go missing.
What they had to do is write everything down that was really important and then lose it by accident. That seems to have been what
there's well, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, we will. But he had actually killed in January, 21st of January, Yvonne Pearson. He murdered her and hid her in a discarded sofa. Which you might think isn't a lot, but this is the north, remember, we don't put things in bins properly.
God bless our flight.
She was in the thing, and he this is where he starts to get really violent in his murders, because he stamped all over the poor woman, broke all the ribs, has massive internal injuries, and just dumped her in the sofa. They think as well, he obviously went back to the body because it wasn't found till March, and there was a newspaper under the body dated
a month after she died.
She'd been killed.
So they think that he was going back to, he'd hidden her so he could go back to her all the time.
Yeah.
But you said that it was builders who found it eventually. They saw a pair of knickers by the sofa and they were like, "Whee!" And they moved the sofa and they're like, "Oh, holy fucking shit."
Yeah, so it went from way to really quick.
That's knickers ruined forever.
Then he killed Helen Ricker, who was a prostitute who worked with her twin sister. He killed her in late January. Her body was found 3 days later. He went to hit the girl with the hand but missed her, hit his window. She started screaming, he hit her again.
Well, he panicked because there was 2 taxi drivers
And
standing next to her, standing next to her, chatting really close to her. He smashed the window. She went crazy, obviously started screaming. 2 taxi drivers are just over there. But presumably TalkSport was turned up too fucking loudly because they didn't do anything. And he dragged her into a woodshed and because she was screaming, he kept her hand over the face until they wandered off and did something else.
Yeah,
Fucking taxi drivers.
So after that as well, he goes back to Manchester after this. I keep saying just because I'm from there, I keep going, and then he went to Manchester.
But also, just to go back, her sister didn't report it because she was afraid of the police and that they would then just arrest her.
Yeah.
So her murder went unreported for ages because of the police's terrible relationship with the community at the time.
So he killed outside, it was at Manchester Royal Infirmary, the hospital. He killed Vera Millwood outside there in, what was that, the same month, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, same month.
It was March 1978, this one.
Yeah, March. So he killed her. She was a very sort of sickly woman as well. She had a lot of health problems and stuff. And she'd recently been in the hospital, and I think she'd been to the hospital for some reason as well. And then this happens to her. And 2 people heard the screams though, but didn't do anything, did they?
Yeah, because in the reports it said, and this is on Oxford Road in Manchester, which is quite a nice sort of area, it's in the middle of town, and they said the screams were ignored because they are a common sound in that area of the town, so
Yeah,
it was written by someone in London.
Can I say, I'm from Manchester, and I know the difference between a scream of happiness someone's drunk on the street and a scream of terror. So, you know, there is a difference. But there is a lot of screaming.
At this time as well, they received another one of these letters with the soft-spoken guy from Sunderland. They linked all the postmarks together, realised it was coming from Sunderland, and he said the next victim will be old. And when he killed Vera, she was 41, so they're like, this is definitely our guy.
Yeah.
But they weren't sure because he didn't mention Yvonne, which they hadn't pinned on him yet. So it was just pushing them further and further in the wrong direction.
So this is where the tapes as well, the hoax tapes, were really coming in as a big part of the investigation. There was adverts on billboards about them saying if you heard tape, you could ring a number and listen to the tape. Which was a bit lovely because people love the Geordie accent. There's all this stuff going on. They also used to go through a time of when at nightclubs in the evening in the north, people would be kicking out time. They used to play the tape loudly to try and jog people's memory.
That's like when they give you a lolly so you don't kick off afterwards. That's a real fucking mood killer, isn't it? When the lights come on and you're like, who am I going to go home with? Oh, brilliant, the Yorkshire Ripper's playing it.
Absolutely unbelievable. Do they put like a beat under it?
Yeah,
so
all the people are on pills. Coming up to the Yorkshire Ripper.
In 1979, he'd not done anything for a year, mainly because his mother was dying and everything stops for money. So he's concentrating on that. His mother dies, and then police get another letter. That's the Yvonne Pearson letter. The chap, incidentally, who was doing the hoax tapes was a chap called John Humble, who was only caught in 2005, and he was from Sunderland, which there was an expert who worked on the tapes, and he pinpointed the accent down to the area that this guy actually was from.
Yeah, he
So
literally
was
picked
brilliant.
the village that he was
Yeah.
from. He said he'll be from Castle, whatever it's called, Castleton or something like this really small area, and it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. John Humble was an unemployed alcoholic, and speaking as an employed alcoholic, I think it's absolutely disgusting.
But it was sending them in the wrong direction the whole time because they got the saliva from the envelopes, but it was the wrong blood group. So they were looking for. So even if they had tested Peter Sutcliffe's blood group, they wouldn't have found that it was him. He also said that next he was going to kill an old slut in Bradford or Liverpool, pick a number. But he went. Instead, he killed Josephine Whittaker, who was none of those things. On the 4th of April 1979, she was only a kid again. She was very young. She was coming home from her grandparents' house because she had a brand new watch that she wanted to show them. She was walking through a very well-lit park, which was a clear open space. The guy comes up to her and asks her the time on her new watch and then hit her with a hammer. And it's horrendous because the next day her brother's going to school and he sees that it's cordoned off by the police and he's like, what's going on over there? Everyone's trying to say there's been a murder and he sees a shoe at the scene and recognises it as her sister. It's incredibly sad.
In the meantime, there's 2 police officers, because Sutcliffe was interviewed 9 times as part of the Ripper inquiry. 2 police officers that had interviewed him noted because he'd bitten a couple of his victims and he had a gap in his front teeth. They'd been to interview him and they're like, well, he fits every description, he's got a gap in his front teeth. They gave information to their people higher up who lost the information because they said, we think this guy really does need investigating further, and then everything they said was just lost. George Oldfield, who was in charge of the investigation, by this point had had 3 heart attacks because he was under so much pressure.
And probably was eating a lot of takeaways later.
Yeah, he
so
probably should. We do like Stodge in the north. And then 1980, Peter gets done for drink driving. But all the meantime, this is all going on. Peter Sutcliffe's having an affair with a woman in Scotland as well, isn't he? He's got a woman in Scotland who thinks his name, he introduced himself as Peter Logan. His family, her family love him. They think he's brilliant. They think he's together.
They think he's hilarious, right? And apparently one of the best jokes, someone said to him, bloody hell, you look like the Yorkshire Ripper. Oh, no. His brother, her brother said to him, you've got evil eyes. And he goes, it's because I'm the Yorkshire Ripper. And they all went, oh my God, oh, Peter, what a funny man. And he just fucking said it to them. I imagine, like, I bet he was hard when he was saying that, like, I've got away with it.
It shows you how cheap petrol was as well. Going out to Scotland, all over the north. Unbelievable.
Maybe he claimed it back on expenses or something.
Well, he works at Shipley, HMRC's just down there.
Well, he was on. They had this 5-point list that they put together to find the Ripper, and on it was if they didn't meet all of these 5, they were to be ignored. So they had to be between 20 and 55 years of age. If they were coloured, different times, they were to be ignored. They had to have feet that were no bigger than a size 9, a B blood type, and they had to be a Geordie, which is obviously wrong because Sunderland, there would be Mackhams, weren't they?
I'll be honest, that sounds like what I look for when I go on like Tinder or something.
And in work, right, because he was interviewed so many times, his nickname was the Ripper. Oh my God. Because he looked exactly like the E-Fits. Everyone in work called him the Ripper.
He also had in his very clean, as you told us, truck, and he was on the poster as well for the company, wasn't he? He was the person that was like.
He was literally their favourite employee.
And this is what he had in his truck, right? This is a handwritten sign that he had in his truck. He wrote, "In this truck is a man whose latent genius, if unleashed, would rock the nation, whose dynamic energy would overpower those around him. Better let him sleep." What does it mean?
That is a shit poem.
I'll be honest, if I saw that in someone's truck, I'd just shop them anyway.
It's basically a more wordy version of the Vans Are Rockin' Don't Come Knocking.
So 1980, he's been done for drink driving. He's getting worried because he thinks he's going to lose his licence. But he still carries on killing. He killed Carry On Killing, the worst Carry On film. There was Barbara Leach, who was found. She was a student in Leeds.
Again, the community kicked off because it was a student and she was a good girl as opposed to a prostitute. She hadn't brought it on itself. And as well, he started spotting a lot of women when he was in a KFC.
Yes, he did.
Which, I tell you what, that brand is so damaged. It's the most requested meal from people when they're being executed is a KFC.
And John Wayne Gacy used to run a branch of one.
Absolutely. So there you go.
It is nice though.
I fucking love it. I fucking love a tower burger. I'd murder 13 women for a tower burger.
Well, it's the only fast food I don't eat, and that makes me better than you. Marguerite Walls, this is where a killing that he weren't sure if it was him or not, because she was walking home from work through a safe route, very well lit, walking up the street. He attacked her But then he realised he'd forgotten his knife.
And also she started screaming, so he strangled her. So when she died, they saw that she'd been strangled and there was no knife found, so they're like, oh, it's not Jack the Ripper, but it's more that he forgot his knife. I don't know how you do that. Keys, wallet, hammer, no knife.
There was Jacqueline Hill, it was in November. He attacked 2 other women in Leeds and Huddersfield. The final murder was Jacqueline Hill. And this is
There was also Teresa Sykes.
Teresa Sykes.
Yeah, she was a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And so sad. She's walking home and her partner, she's only 16, walking home to the flat. He looks out the window and he sees her being attacked. And then, thank God, he runs out. And Peter Sutcliffe, because he's scared of dogs, let alone a big guy called Jimmy. So he runs off and thank God she got away.
Thank God he wasn't a taxi driver. And then carry on.
I'm on the clock, it's fine.
So Jacqueline Hill was the final murder, and this was the one where there was the bag, wasn't there? There was 2 people who found a bag covered in blood, and it was 2 students. And one of the students he used to be a police officer
in Hong Kong, and he was like, this is fresh blood, and he brought it to the police, and he went, yeah, no, right, we're going to go down there and look. Apparently they just looked around and went, yeah, no, we didn't find anything, and where they were looking, the body was 25 yards away.
Yeah.
And it needs some music in the background, like, I can't find it, boss.
It was at this point Trevor Birdsall, who obviously Peter's big pal, he was starting to think, I think there's something not right about Peter.
He's still drinking with him, bear in mind.
Still got the pub with him. And encouraged by his wife at the time, she said, look, I think you need to say something, I think it might be him. So he wrote a letter to the police, handed it in at the station, and they lost the letter.
Wow.
Lost the letter. So this is the letter, the police report, they're concentrating on those tapes for ages, everything's just going wrong. The E-fit looks like him, he had the gap in the teeth. Everything was pretty much pointing to Peter Sutcliffe, who'd been interviewed 9 times, whose nickname was the Ripper.
So his last murder was Olivia Reeves. Now she was out with her friend on the game as well.
Olivia Reeves. This was the woman who he didn't murder, but he was So this is arrest, 2nd of January 1981.
He pulled up. He tried to get a friend first, Denise Hall, and he frightened her. Because he looked just like Jack the Ripper. Not Jack the Ripper. Who knows? Time traveller. He looked just like the Yorkshire Ripper, so she was creepy. So he went, alright, how about you shag me for a tenner? Which must have fucking killed him, right? To double the rate. And she still wouldn't get in the car. And then he pulled up to Olivia Reeves and he said a tenner. And she went, tenner sounds alright, yeah. So she got in the car with him and then they drove to this spot that she had, but he couldn't get it up. And apparently she said they just sat in the car and talked about him and his problems. I presume he skimmed over some of the details.
And he was in a car that had false plates on as well. And it was at a place called Light Trade House in Sheffield where he was caught. And bizarrely, we did a preview for this, didn't we? And 2 people came up to us afterwards and were like, we used to work there. That was all about it. We were like, all right, this is interesting. So Peter says, oh, this is my girlfriend. And they go, right, well, what's her name? And he goes, I don't know because it's not my girlfriend.
He also lied about his name, said he was Peter Williams. Don't drag the Welsh into it.
Then he's arrested. He was taken to Dewsbury police station. But before this, he says, "Oh, I need a wee." So what he does is gets out and he goes away to have a wee. And one of the policemen who arrest him thinks they hear something, and they don't think anymore of it. So they arrest him because at this time they don't think he's the Ripper. He asks for another wee at the police station, and what he does is he's got a knife on him and he hides it in the system. And what he's done when he's gone for a wee outside is dropped the hammer and a knife. You take, obviously when you get arrested, I mean I don't know, I'm just speaking, I mean I reckon when you get arrested they take your clothes off you. They stripped him of his clothing and what he was wearing underneath.
This is terrifying.
Do you
but
want to
also
tell
my brand new fancy dress costume.
This is, took his clothes off and underneath, on his legs, he's wearing a V-neck sweater with his legs in the sleeves, so his genitals were exposed.
It's a strong look, isn't it?
It's different.
I think Dior did that 2 seasons ago. I'm sure.
So this was for him to allow him to kneel over his victims and still keep his knees, supported. and have everything ready to do whatever he wanted to do. Now, this wasn't used, they didn't make a record of this in the evidence.
I love how that is like not noteworthy.
So this lady's going, what's going on? Really, this should end with, and then they knew it was him and they let him go. It's alright. They never made a record of it because they weren't thinking at that time that he was the Yorkshire Ripper. So this was noted, but it wasn't used officially because they didn't put it down at the time, they did it afterwards. So he was questioned for 2 days because they started to get onto him a bit.
And suddenly this police officer who was there at the arrest went, I'm sure I heard him put something down when he went for a piss. And they went back and they found the hammer and the knife on the wall that he just sort of kept there for safekeeping, which is like a really good bit of policing. They came back, they found the murder weapons and they were like, holy shit. But they basically found him by mistake because they happened to be interviewing a prostitute.
And he confessed it in the most sort of Yorkshire way, which is they questioned him and he goes, right, I think I know what you're leading up to. And they go,
That's what my dad says when I want money.
Yeah. And they go, well, what's that? And he goes, the Yorkshire Ripper. And they go, well, what about him? He goes, it's me. So that was how he confessed. But he said all he wanted to do was tell his wife that it was him afterwards. Oh, I can just imagine that he told her, because what he says to Sonia is, it's me, I'm the Yorkshire Ripper, I killed all those women. And she said, oh, Peter, whatever did you do that for? I imagine. I didn't know anything about it. Sonia actually...
You're going to get sued.
Yeah, Sonia did sue Private Eye magazine because I think they did a cartoon or something that suggested that she knew a bit more, and she took in his lot to court, and there's a good video of him coming out because he loses and she gets thousands of pounds in damages, and he says, well, if this is justice, I'm a banana. Because he really wasn't happy about it.
That's the most like that's the poshest way to say that you're really fucked off about it. Well, then I'm a bloody banana. That's that famous have I got news for you wit shining through.
So Peter Sutcliffe, to cut a long story short, he decides when he's admitted it, he says, oh, I was doing it because God told me to do it, and it was a voice I heard in the graveyard that I used to work in from this gravestone that said I've got to go out and kill prostitutes.
So hack Catholic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, at what point would God say, put a V-neck jumper on?
So he did get sent to prison. He got sent to Broadmoor, the mental hospital, mental institution. I think part of the reason he went to Broadmoor would be because to put him in a normal prison, it would have been hassle central for them.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, he's already had one of his eyes stabbed out.
Yeah, he has had his eyes stabbed. And it's quite interesting now because every so often the Daily Mail, and particularly the Sun, all the worst papers, will do little stories like Ripper updates. So I've been catching up with the Ripper today. Apparently,
It's like a round robin letter at
It is,
Christmas,
yeah.
isn't it?
He's enjoying his lifestyle in Broadmoor, so say the Daily Mail. He eats chocolate, he likes watching TV and listening to music. He has visitors quite often.
This
likes
sounds
like
like a
a
dating
Yeah,
profile.
yeah. Oh, it gets better.
He likes short walks in the yard.
He enjoys the X Factor. He's not allowed to vote for the winner though. He's now a Jehovah's Witness. I can just see loads of women going, nah. He loves Diet Coke. He likes to watch I'm a Celebrity to get me out of here. Which I'd like to see them do a version of that reversed from Australia in Broadmoor. I'd like to see Katie Hopkins put him with a Stockwell Strangler and see how that goes. It'd be called I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here. Or, in the case of Jimmy Saville and Broadmoor, I'm a Celebrity, get me in there. Because he had the bloody keys, didn't he? Do what he wanted. There's a famous picture as well, which you've probably all seen, and it's a picture of Jimmy Saville,
this is great.
Frank Bruno, and the Yorkshire Ripper. Jimmy Savile's just stood there because he was like King of Broadmoor. Peter Sutcliffe's wearing a shell suit in the gym, and he's shaking hands with Frank Bruno. And he didn't know anything about it at the time.
So he was a member of staff.
Apparently afterwards, after that picture came out, the two men did put out statements distancing themselves from Jimmy Saville.
But Saville had done it as a trick, hadn't he?
Yeah, he was like,
as
this
a
is
joke,
Yeah.
introduced Frank Bruno to Peter Sutcliffe when there were photographers around.
Yeah. So if you've not seen it, just Google it. It's the most bizarre picture you will ever see in your life. So that's
Still in there now, isn't he?
He's still in there. Sonia still lives in the Six Garden Lane. Go and visit it. You can. It's still there. The house that they both lived in together. She still lives in it on her own. She still goes to visit him. He's been attacked. He's blind in one eye, and something else has happened to his other eye because They're all mad in there, aren't they?
I think that's the point of it, but I can't be sure.
Yeah.
He's
And,
type 2 diabetic as well, and I'm
Yeah, he is.
type 1 diabetic, and I read that he was diabetic, and I was like, well, you've let the community know. Do you want to talk about the Saville stuff?
I think we're running late, and I think I'd get sued, but I definitely have a conspiracy theory.
But Saville was, when they took teeth impressions, they did take some from Jimmy Saville, because one of the bodies was found basically at the bottom of his garden.
And there was several occasions where he was definitely in the area on the night, and they had an association with each other. So I have a bit of a conspiracy theory there. And as if Jimmy Saville needed anything else to bring his fucking character into this review.
I love that, like, you imagine saying, like, we're going to get sued. By who? Jimmy Saville or the Yorkshire Ripper?
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
That's not even going to get
They're not allowed to vote for X Factor, they'll be allowed to listen to a podcast. So this has been...
Scaring dogs off with his jewellery.
This has been our Killa and Filla podcast. Thank you so much for coming down and